It is springtime, and with springtime we get all kinds of flowering things. We get all kinds of fruit that start coming into season, even things like nuts, almonds, and all of the little things that bees love. So that's what we're gonna talk about today. We're gonna talk about bees, and in particular, how sometimes a bee can be a fish. Yep, that's right, fish bees today on Weekly Dad News. Well, let's go! Bees, honeybees, carpenter bees, bumblebees, orchard bees, there's all different kinds of bees. But the one that probably everybody thinks of when they think of a bee is this guy, right? He's your classic honeybee. The kind that make honey for Winnie the Pooh, and the kind that make honey for me and for you. When we're thinking about what kind of bees are buzzworthy, there's a big reason that we think of honeybees more than the others. They're domesticated. In the same way that pigs and horses and chickens are domesticated, honeybees are domesticated too. It's slightly different, but we do have this extended, long relationship with bees as pollinators being somewhat domesticated, specifically honeybees. So 10 years or so ago, we started hearing about something called colony collapse disorder, about 2006. And it was an instance where honeybee colonies specifically would just kind of leave. Like all the workers would bounce and there'd be plenty of food, there'd still be babies there, there'd be a queen, she's got a couple of attendants still with her, but all the rest of the bees would just leave. We still don't really know why it was happening, and the bees it's affected, they started looking at it. No clear cause has been found, but here's some thoughts, right? Increased losses due to a mite, a little thing that messes with honeybees. New diseases we don't know about, including a thing called Israeli acute paralysis virus and the gut parasite Nosema. Pesticide poisoning through exposure to pesticide, stressed bees because of management practices like transportation to multiple locations, changes to the habitat where bees forage, inadequate forage, poor nutrition, potential immune suppressing stress on bees caused by one or a combination of factors identified above. So here we have the honeybee, which is only able to exist when it's taking part in a hive, doing what essentially looks like a union walkout. They're saying, nope, done, bye-bye. We're not sure where they go, if they go join another hive or if they just take off and die. We got really worried about this, and rightly so. It's a strange thing to happen. But one of the big reasons we were super worried about this is because of how important honeybees are to us. Honeybees are all these things that they pollinate, right? So they pollinate a lot of our fruit and vegetables, stuff that ends up on our table, as well as having the secondary markets for honeybee wax and honey. The flowers and fruits and vegetables and almonds are so important in Central Valley that they truck bees in. So this is that stress thing. If you own a hive of domesticated honeybees, you drive it and park it in a farmer's field and then come and pick it back up. So you can effectively rent out the bees and then you take care of them in between that time, making sure they're in a place where they have the right climate, the right foods, plants and things, flowers and things to get their nectar from, and you just make sure they're okay. And then when there's new queens, you can take those queens and some of the hive and you can make new hives. So you can propagate the hive. But here's some numbers on how much they are worth to us. So honeybees specifically are responsible for pollinating 130 or more types of crops worth almost $15 billion a year, billion with a B. California itself has 840,000 natural beehives, and that's both honey, bumblebee, orchard, several different kinds. But it needs 2.4 million hives for pollination. That has to do with what we've done in the Imperial Valley and other parts of California, where we've taken land that was just kind of desert but fertile, watered it, and we have all these crops there. The problem is where the crops are is not where the bees are. So you can't really have, almonds become almonds because there's no bees around. Definitely not enough bees to pollinate all of the almonds that come in at the same time. So this factory farming approach to even agriculture means that bees need to be brought in. The honeybee, much like almonds, is not native to North America. The honeybee is native to Europe and Africa and Saudi Arabia, the Levant, all that area. That's where they're from. And so when we came over here and we realized that the native bees weren't getting everything pollinated, we started bringing bees over. This is like the 17th century. And those bees that we brought over took off. They're all over the place. But as is often the case with bringing in some kind of a new species to a place, look at the cane toad in Australia if you want a weird example, but when you bring stuff into a place, some of those species can displace the native species. Now, bumblebees are a pollinator as well as honeybees, but bumblebees end up in hives of 50 or so individuals, where honeybees, a hive has hundreds and hundreds of individuals. Bumblebees are 2 to 4 times more effective at pollinating than honeybees for specific kinds of produce, fruit, or veg. And it has to do with the way that they carry pollen around. Bumblebees have these abdominal fuzziness that holds the pollen, and honeybees hold it on their leg. So that means that bumblebees are more efficient, but honeybees are more numerous. So if you can get 50 bumblebees is one colony of bumblebees, and several hundred to 1,000 honeybees is one honeybee, it's a lot easier to give up the efficiency for numbers, and that's what we do. One of the reasons that honeybees are so inefficient at pollinating is they're what's considered nectar thieves, meaning that because they don't pick up the pollen to go drop off somewhere else on all of the flowers that they visit, some of them they're just taking all the energy that they put into getting them to come there and not giving them what they built it for. So when they come to the flower and they get in and they get the nectar at the very bottom of the base of the flower, they're just getting the nectar. They haven't gotten anywhere near the stamen or the pistil so that they can brush up and get pollen or drop pollen off. So that's the inefficiency piece, and it kind of screws over some kinds of plants. What that also means is that the efficient pollinators, like the bumblebee, when they get there, there isn't any. It's been taken by all these honeybees. So that's the split, that's the tension, right? And when we factory farm bees to the point where they're everywhere, we drive them around and drop them off, then pick them up. As a matter of fact, there are hive rustlers, right? So in the same way that there used to be cattle rustlers who would steal cattle, change the brand and sell it off, there are hive rustlers who will see a honeybee hive that's been set and left in a field, and they go just pick it up, put it in the back of their truck and drive off. And so many of these deals are over the phone or over the internet, and all as a farmer you want is to be able to pay somebody to set a hive up for a couple of weeks during flowering season, and then come and take it away. You never see them. They drop it off in the morning when you're on the other side of the farm. They pick it up at night when all the bees are in it. So because of that, it's an easy target. And a hive of bees can cost $100, $200 per visit. So those 1 in a 2.4 million that they need annually, they're paying for those. And the interesting thing with these is that a hive will often start out in, say, Florida and do orange season in Florida, and then come do almond season in California, and then maybe be up in Maine for blueberry season, right? So they move around. There's a remarkable parallel to be drawn here between migrant workers as well, where they move to where the food needs to be harvested. Right before them, almost to the day, the bees were there, getting it ready for them to pick. These rustlers, the guys that steal these, it's hilarious. I highly recommend looking at all the stories about rustlers and how crazy they get, because it's like this weird underground thing. Even the beekeepers are weird kind of underground things. Okay, we're getting to the fish part, I promise. I just need this groundwork because of what comes next. Because what comes next is Ronald Reagan in 1970, when he was governor of California, he signed into law the California Endangered Species Act. California Endangered Species Act offers protections to any, and this is a quote from the act, bird, mammal, fish, amphibia, or reptile. Bird, mammal, fish, amphibia, reptile. No mention of bugs, no mention of bacteria, no mention of funguses, no mention of flora. It's specifically for those 5 categories: bird, mammal, fish, amphibia, or reptile, whose existence in the state was threatened and included invertebrates in the definition of fish. Yeah, that's right. So not only do you have these 5 categories, but in one of them, in fish, they're counting invertebrates. Okay. The law was updated in 1984 under Governor George Deukmejian, again in California. The reference to invertebrates was removed, but the new law specifically protected the Trinity bristle snail, which is an invertebrate mollusk which lives on land, right? It's got a shell but doesn't have a spinal column. This is where it gets weird, because by putting invertebrates into that subcategory of fish, they created a problem between the biological definitions and the legal definitions of things. So the biological definition of fish does not include invertebrate. It also does not include mollusk, which was in there as well. So in the act, the original act, the way it was written, it defined a fish as any wild fish, mollusk, crustacean. Crabs aren't fish. Invertebrate, because it was thinking about crabs. Amphibian, geckos and stuff. Well, not geckos, newts and stuff. Or part, spawn, or ovum of any of these animals. So they're not only protecting the animals that are endangered, but they're protecting the life cycle of the animal that's endangered. So if they lay eggs, they give birth to live young. If they have a cycle where they turn into something else for a while, think about like frogs, right? But by defining them in this way, you have this big split between the legal and the biological definition. And this isn't the first time something like this has happened with definitions. Here's one where it's religious and biological. So the Catholic Church, when people were settling North America, what is now Canada and what is now Quebec, the Catholic Church said, you know what, during Lent, you can eat beaver. It counts as a fish. And they did that because the beaver's in the water for part of most of its life, just in and out and back and forth in the water, and there weren't enough fish always. But the Catholic Church made that allowance. So now you have a religious definition of fish that's at odds with the biological definition of fish. So you can define them in any clade you want and have them be totally different. And it's super weird to have beavers be a fish. This is where this is going, but for bees. And these recontextualizations happen all the time. Think about the argument over vegetables and fruit, right? So tomatoes. Are tomatoes a fruit or a vegetable? You can go have a real fun argument with your family on this. But there was a farmer in 1893, Nix, and John Nix said, I don't want to pay the vegetable tax that you're charging me on my tomato crop. And I don't want to pay it because I think a tomato is a fruit. It has seeds, it's the fleshy part. Like there's all these ways to define it as a fruit and go, yeah, it's a fruit. But it pushes against common sense because you wouldn't put this in a fruit salad. Well, you might, I would not. And so he went to court. And he went all the way to the Supreme Court, Nix v. Hedden, 1893. And they said, dude, pay your taxes, it's a vegetable. So legally, this is a vegetable. Botanically, it's not. Vegetable isn't a botanical term. So how do we know what things are when nobody can agree on how to say what things are? We kind of don't. We have to get into the weeds on this stuff and figure out what different things are based on the space we're in, right? Whether it's religious conversations, legal conversations, or scientific conversations. So those paradigms and the words used in those paradigms matter a lot. Here we go. We're on the bee and fish thing right now. So in 2018, the Center for Food Safety, the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation, and the Defenders of Wildlife petitioned the California Fish and Game Commission to include 4 species of bumblebee on the endangered species list. They want those 4 protected because what's happening is other kinds of bees are coming in and ruining their ability to survive because they're eating all the nectar and not sufficiently pollinating. So the bumblebees are both important to the natural pollination cycle of some plants and are better at it than honeybees. But if that goes into effect, all of a sudden some honeybees will be in effect threatening some bumblebees. We got an interspecies brawl. That's the buzz, interspecies brawl. So they go in and they say, hey, we want these 4 bumblebees on the list because they're getting low in numbers. We go out and we find fewer and fewer of them, and it's because of the incursion of these other bees. The groups that are against it are almost all agricultural entities, including the Almond Alliance of California, right? So the guys that are making almonds say, we can't do this without honeybees, and if you don't let us bring honeybees in, it's gonna be harder to do almonds. Bumblebees are more expensive, even if they are more efficient. They aren't really kept in hives. They aren't really farmed like honeybees are. They're not domesticated. So they put that in and they say, hey, we're doing this and we want to put them under the fish categorization because there isn't another one. There's no bug column. And then subdivide the bugs, and point is there's no spot for them if you don't put them under the fish category because of the way it was defined. It includes crabs. It includes lobsters. Those ain't fish. Clams, mollusks. It's really strange. So this battle goes back and forth. They fight over it. And there was a 2018 ruling and then an appeal, another appeal, like it keeps going back and forth, and sometimes the agriculture wins and sometimes the bee people win. And it goes back and forth. And the reason it goes back and forth is because of that language question. And when you go in and you start saying, okay, well, how do we understand this? There's this split in legal theory between what are called textualists and purposivists. And what they're doing is a textualist is going by the letter of the law. And a purposivist is looking at what's this law for? But that gets really confusing in this one, right? Because by a pure textual reading, that's why they have to be under fish. A purposivist reading doesn't really have a great place to put them, but understands what they were trying to do with this law is protect threatened creatures that are threatened by ways we've changed the environment. So that split there between the literal reading of the law and making bees fish, or the idea of the law is that we want to save these animals, is kind of at odds. It's trying to figure out, even though both of them would probably agree the bees should be protected, it doesn't mean that they will be protected in the right way or under the right circumstances. So this definition of fish, which includes fish, crustaceans, and amphibians. Crustaceans and amphibians are not fish, nor are mollusks. But it says invertebrate. And so a textualist would probably take that invertebrate claim and say, okay, they probably meant things in water that are invertebrates, mollusks, crustaceans, snails. But then you point to that trinity snail. It covers that. That doesn't live in the water at all, ever. So now we're back to the, okay, well, then it does cover invertebrates, but which ones? How broad can you do this? And I ask how broad you can do this. By the way, that whole stuff, there's a great write-up on Slate where they have an interview with a guy who reviews this stuff and talks through the honeybee issue. There's some good stuff on the San Francisco Chronicle as well, and I'll link those below. Oh, while I'm at it, like and subscribe if you're getting anything out of this. Comment if you think I'm an idiot talking about bees that are fish. That's fine too. But this idea, right? This idea where there's this tension between protecting a thing that we duly want to protect and the letter of the law keeps coming up as our world changes and evolves, and we recognize the impacts that we are having upon it and the changes that we are experiencing being in and of it. So think about all the words you use that don't really have the same kind of meaning now as they used to. Pick up the phone. You used to pick it up off of the cradle and put it to your ear. Hang up the phone on the other side. You take the thing and you hang it in the little thing that holds the speaky bit or ear bit, right? Those change. Think about the icon for save, the little floppy disk, the trash can on your desktop, where it's a little actual trash can or recycle bin, but that's not what it is. And so as these words change and evolve and we remember the colloquial use of them and then switch to the other use of them, we start bumping into these issues. So let me give you an extreme example of how far and how dumb this could get. And then I'll have the point after that. But right now we're sitting there and going, okay, well, a bee is a fish. That's currently what's come down. That's the latest ruling says, yep, they can classify the bumblebees as fish because of the way it's worded. So now those bees are legally, for the Endangered Species Act, a fish bird, or fish bee, bee fish, bish, fee, fish, put two E's in it, fish. Okay, so what if we wanted to protect something else? What if we wanted to protect another kind of bug? What if there was a louse that we wanted to protect? Some kind of louse that, say there's a specific louse, and this is fantasy, say there's a specific kind of louse that when properly cultivated, it produces some kind of a chemical that lets us slow down aging. Let's also say, for the sake of argument, that that particular kind of louse is the pubic louse. Now, pubic louse are more commonly referred to as crabs. They are not a crab, they're a louse. They look like that. Their habitat has been threatened over the last 20 years because everybody's shaving their private parts. So they don't have anywhere to live. So if this louse had some kind of a byproduct that we wanted to farm, would we then factory farm and have people that had to volunteer to keep from shaving? Would we then have to prohibit people from shaving because that's their habitat? Like, that's a really weird example, but you get how that is kind of an extension or almost satire of this bees are fish thing, this bumblebees are fish thing. But that's the problem with some of our laws, is they were written in, this one's 1970, revised in 84, but hasn't been updated to redefine how we classify specific animals, classify certain animals that could be covered. And in trying to cover those animals, we're now jumping through hoops backwards, trying to figure out the exact way to put it together so they're still covered and still okay. So that's kind of what I'd like to have happen going forward, is we revisit some of this stuff. You know, get in there, get in the weeds. And when we get in the weeds and we watch this court case go through and have these bizarre ideas and conclusions that work and are beneficial, I don't have huge issues with them. But when we're going through these ideas, these concepts, maybe we need the legislature to step in and say, we see what's happening in the courts, continue doing it there, we're gonna work on it here. And that is happening. This bee thing has been escalated to the federal level. They're trying to get the federal Environmental Protection Agency to say, yes, these bees are protected. It's happened before. But how many others of our laws are like that? How many other laws have outdated definitions and can't keep up? Can't keep up with technology, can't keep up with AI, can't keep up with engineering. Remember the copyright episode? Can't keep up with copyright, patent, trademark. All these laws were written for places where things were less digital. We had less of an effect on the planet. And because of that, and they're in dire need of upgrading and clarification in consultation with people that know that vegetable is not a botanical term. They need consultation with people that know how AI works. They need consultation with copyright professionals and lawyers who understand that stuff. So for as long as bees are fish, I'll be Justin doing Weekly Dad News. Bye-bye. Go have fish for dinner.